The moment the Roman soldier pierced the side of Jesus on the cross, history shifted forever. But what happened to that soldier after this fateful act? Was he just another name lost to time, or did his life take a turn so profound that it left an indelible mark on history? Today, we're diving into the powerful, untold story of the man behind the spear, the soldier who stood at the center of the most pivotal moment in human history. Who was the soldier that pierced the side of Jesus? History and tradition have handed down a name, Longinus, a Roman centurion. He wasn't just an ordinary soldier, but one of the elite, trained in combat, discipline, and loyalty to the Roman Empire. As a centurion, Longinus commanded respect and authority. His experience on the battlefield had likely hardened his heart. He had seen death many times before and had probably become numb to it. Yet, the day he stood at the foot of the cross, something began to change within him. But why was Longinus there in the first place? Crucifixions were common in the Roman Empire, and soldiers like him were often tasked with overseeing these brutal executions. To them, it was just another day on the job, another criminal to put to death. But this wasn't just any ordinary execution. This was Jesus of Nazareth, the man many believed to be the Messiah. Longinus had likely heard the rumors. He had probably witnessed the crowd's reaction as they demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Maybe he even heard about the miracles and teachings of Jesus, but like many Roman soldiers, he may have dismissed it as superstition. Longinus, standing there in his armor, was a symbol of the empire's power, cold, efficient, and unmoved by the suffering around him. The soldiers weren't there to show mercy. They were there to make sure the job was done, and done well. Longinus likely gave the orders, directing his men to carry out the execution swiftly. But as the hours passed, something about this crucifixion was different. Maybe it was the way Jesus remained silent as he was mocked, or how he forgave those who crucified him, even in his final moments of agony. Little by little, this scene was affecting Longinus in a way he couldn't quite understand. As the day went on, Longinus found himself watching Jesus more closely. He had seen many people die, but there was something extraordinary about this man. What could it have been? Was it the strength Jesus showed in his silence? Was it the love he demonstrated, even as he suffered? Or was it something deeper that Longinus couldn't yet put into words? Standing there at the foot of the cross, Longinus might have begun to feel something stir in his soul, a sense of unease, perhaps. As a Roman soldier, he had probably learned to suppress his emotions, especially in the face of death. But Jesus' death was different. It was as if the suffering on that cross was affecting not just the people around him, but the very earth itself. The piercing of Jesus' side stands as one of the most haunting and deeply symbolic moments in the story of the crucifixion. It's an event that seems, at first glance, to be simply a part of the grim routine of execution, but it holds profound theological and spiritual significance. As Jesus hung lifeless on the cross, his suffering had already come to an end, and his final words had been spoken. In Roman practice, however, it wasn't enough for a man to appear dead. Death had to be confirmed, especially in a public execution like this one. Normally, the legs of those crucified would be broken to hasten death by suffocation. But when the soldiers approached Jesus, they found that he had already passed away. At this moment, Longinus, the Roman centurion on duty, was given the order that would change his life. Instead of breaking Jesus' legs, as was the custom, Longinus was instructed to pierce his side with a spear. The spear was likely heavy, a familiar weapon to this seasoned soldier, but on this day, its use would lead to something he never could have anticipated. As he stepped forward and drove the spear into Jesus' side, it wasn't just the end of a duty, it was the beginning of something much larger. In that instant, something miraculous occurred. As the Gospel of John recounts, blood and water flowed from the wound. This might seem like a minor detail, but it has been the subject of theological reflection for centuries. The blood was a clear sign of Jesus' humanity, his suffering, and the sacrifice he made for the salvation of mankind. The water, on the other hand, has been interpreted as a symbol of purification, cleansing, and the new life that would spring forth through Jesus' death and resurrection. Together, the blood and water represented the dual nature of Christ, fully human, yet fully divine. This wasn't just a random event, it was a powerful message to those who were watching closely. Imagine Longinus in that moment. He was no stranger to death. As a Roman soldier, he had seen countless men perish on the battlefield and at the hands of executioners. The brutality of crucifixion, with all its suffering, was just another part of his daily life. And yet, as he pierced the side of this man, he must have sensed that something was different. Maybe it was the strange occurrences surrounding the crucifixion, the darkening sky, the earthquake, the cries of Jesus from the cross. Or perhaps it was the sight of this blood and water flowing from his side, something unexpected and yet deeply symbolic. In that moment, the soldier must have begun to wonder, who was this man that he had helped to crucify? The realization likely crept over him slowly, not with a flash of insight, but as a dawning awareness. Longinus, the one who had delivered the final blow, was standing face to face with a truth that would soon become undeniable. He had pierced not just the body of a criminal, but the body of someone far greater, someone whose death was not an end, but the beginning of something beyond his comprehension. The moment of the spear's piercing was more than just an act of confirming death. It was the turning point for Longinus. What had been routine now became personal, even spiritual. He had followed orders, as he had done so many times before, but this time, the consequences went far beyond the physical realm. As the blood and water flowed, it was as though the veil was being lifted from his eyes, revealing the true nature of the man he had helped to crucify. Perhaps Longinus thought back to the earlier hours of that day, to the way Jesus had endured his suffering with a dignity that was almost supernatural. He might have recalled the words that Jesus spoke from the cross, words of forgiveness even for those who were causing his death. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Had Longinus understood the weight of those words? In that moment, with the blood and water pouring out, did it suddenly become clear to him that this was no ordinary man? Theologians have long meditated on this moment, viewing it as the fulfillment of prophecies and a testament to Jesus' mission. The fact that Jesus' bones were not broken, as was the case with the two thieves crucified beside him, fulfilled Old Testament prophecies that spoke of the Messiah, the Lamb of God, whose bones would remain intact. And the flow of blood and water was not just a physical phenomenon, but a spiritual sign that pointed to the greater reality of Jesus' sacrificial death. For Longinus, this act of piercing was likely the first step in a journey of transformation. He had been a soldier for Rome, but in that moment, something inside him shifted. The physical act of plunging the spear into Jesus' side became a spiritual awakening for the centurion. The blood and water that flowed from the side of Christ wasn't just a sign of death, it was the sign of new life, not only for the world, but perhaps for Longinus himself. The piercing of Jesus' side is often seen as the culmination of his suffering, the moment when his death was confirmed. But for Longinus, it was the moment when something far more important was confirmed, the realization that this was indeed the Son of God, and that his own life, and the lives of all who were present, had just been irrevocably changed. The spear that pierced Jesus' side was not just a weapon of death, but a tool that opened the eyes of the man who wielded it. As soon as the spear pierced Jesus' side and the blood and water flowed, the world seemed to react. The Bible describes this as a moment filled with sudden, extraordinary events. In the immediate aftermath, nature itself responded to the death of Christ in ways that could not be ignored, even by those who were indifferent to the crucifixion. Darkness had already covered the land from noon until 3 in the afternoon, a supernatural sign that had likely unsettled many, including the Roman soldiers who stood by, used to executions but not to phenomena like this. However, what happened next went beyond anything anyone could have imagined. The earth trembled violently. The Gospels tell us that there was an earthquake at the very moment Jesus died. This wasn't just a small tremor, it was powerful enough to split rocks, tear the temple veil from top to bottom, and open tombs around Jerusalem. To those witnessing it, this wasn't just a coincidence. It was as if the earth itself was mourning the death of its creator. Imagine the fear and confusion that must have swept over the soldiers, the onlookers, and even the chief priests. What had begun as a routine execution was turning into an event marked by undeniable signs from heaven. Among these wonders, the tearing of the temple veil stood out as particularly significant. The veil separated the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple where only the high priest could enter once a year, from the rest of the temple. This veil was thick, designed to ensure that no one, except the chosen priest, could come near to the presence of God. Its sudden tearing, from top to bottom, was a clear signal that something had changed. Symbolically, it represented the end of the separation between God and humanity. Jesus' death was opening the way for all people to come into the presence of God directly, without the need for a human intermediary. The soldiers and the crowd may not have grasped the full meaning at the time, but they would have understood that this was no ordinary event. These signs, the earthquake, the tearing of the veil, and the strange darkness, would have left even the most hardened hearts shaken. Longinus, the centurion who had just pierced Jesus' side, must have been deeply affected by what he was witnessing. The Bible doesn't give us a detailed account of his thoughts in that moment, but it's not hard to imagine the impact these events had on him. The ground beneath his feet was trembling, and the temple, the very heart of Jewish religious life, was being torn open. The heavens had darkened, and now, with the earth shaking, the signs were impossible to ignore. But the wonders didn't stop there. According to the Gospel of Matthew, another miraculous event followed. Tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had died were raised to life. After Jesus' resurrection, these saints appeared to many people in Jerusalem, serving as further proof of the divine power that had been unleashed by Christ's death. These saints were a testimony to the new life that Jesus' sacrifice had made possible. Imagine the astonishment of those who saw these resurrected saints walking the streets of Jerusalem. The very fabric of reality seemed to be shifting. For those present at the crucifixion, these signs were not merely strange occurrences. They were divine confirmations that something monumental had just happened. The Roman soldiers, who had been so confident in their duty, now found themselves standing in the middle of a cosmic event, a turning point in history. Everything they thought they knew about life and death, about power and authority, was being questioned by the undeniable evidence of the supernatural right in front of them. It's likely that these signs, particularly the earthquake and the tearing of the temple veil, forced those present to reconsider their actions. Many might have come to Golgotha that day expecting just another execution, but what they saw and felt left no doubt that this was far more significant. The immediate aftermath of Jesus' death was filled with these divine signs and wonders that pointed to the fact that the man who had just died was no ordinary man. For Longinus and the other soldiers, the events of that day were overwhelming. The combination of what they had seen during the crucifixion, the dignity of Jesus in his suffering, his words of forgiveness, and now the signs that followed his death, must have led them to question everything they knew. The Roman Empire was built on power, might, and control, yet here was a man whose death seemed to have shaken the very foundations of the world. It was becoming clear that this execution was not the end, but rather the beginning of something far greater. The power of these signs and wonders was undeniable, and they marked the start of a change that would ripple through history. For those present, the question now wasn't just about what they had witnessed, but about what they would do in response. Would they dismiss these events as mere coincidences, or would they begin to understand that they had just been a part of something far beyond the scope of their everyday lives? In the midst of the chaos that followed Jesus' death, one voice cut through the confusion, echoing a revelation that would change everything. It was the voice of Longinus, the Roman centurion who had just pierced Jesus' side. His words, simple yet profound, are recorded in the Gospels. Truly, this was the Son of God. This statement didn't come from a follower of Jesus or one of his disciples, but from a hardened soldier of the Roman Empire, a man who had likely witnessed countless executions and seen death up close more times than he could count. Yet, in that moment, something shifted in him, a recognition of divinity in the man he had just helped put to death. The transformation of Longinus is particularly striking because of who he was. A Roman centurion was no ordinary soldier. These men were leaders, seasoned warriors who commanded authority and respect. Their duty was to uphold the will of the Roman Empire, often through violence and force. Longinus would have been a man trained to suppress compassion, to remain indifferent to the suffering of those he executed. Yet, here he was, at the foot of the cross, speaking words that revealed a deep, spiritual awakening. What was it that brought Longinus to this moment of confession? It wasn't just the miraculous signs, the earthquake, the darkness, the tearing of the temple veil, though these certainly played a role. It was something more personal, more intimate. It was the way Jesus had died. Throughout the crucifixion, Jesus had shown an unshakable dignity, even in the face of extreme suffering. He had spoken words of forgiveness, even for those who were killing him. He had cried out to God, not in anger or bitterness, but in faith. Longinus had likely never seen a man face death like this. Jesus' final moments, when he cried out, "It is finished," and then gave up his spirit, must have struck Longinus in a profound way. This was no ordinary man, no ordinary death. Something about Jesus' final breath carried a weight, a power, that reached into the hardened heart of this Roman soldier and broke through. In that instant, Longinus saw what so many others had failed to see, the truth of who Jesus really was. His confession, "Truly, this was the Son of God," was not just an observation, It was an admission of something greater. For a man like Longinus, steeped in Roman beliefs, to acknowledge Jesus as the Son of God was nothing short of revolutionary. It's important to understand the magnitude of this statement. The title, Son of God, wasn't something Longinus would have used lightly. In Roman culture, the emperor himself was often seen as a god or a son of the gods. To declare someone else, especially a crucified criminal, as the Son of God was to challenge the very foundations of Roman authority and belief. Yet, in that moment, Longinus didn't hesitate. He spoke what he knew to be true, regardless of the consequences or the implications. Longinus' confession also stands as a testament to the power of Jesus' presence, even in death. The centurion hadn't followed Jesus through his ministry, hadn't heard his teachings or seen his miracles. He had only witnessed the events of that single day. Yet, even with that limited exposure, he came to the same conclusion that many of Jesus' closest followers had reached, that this man was more than just a prophet or a teacher. He was the Son of God. It's a powerful reminder of the impact that Jesus' life and death had on everyone around him, from his disciples to his enemies. Some traditions even suggest that Longinus' confession was the beginning of his journey of faith. There are legends that say Longinus went on to become a follower of Christ, spreading the gospel and ultimately dying as a martyr for his newfound faith. Whether or not these stories are historically accurate, they point to a truth that resonates through history: that encountering Jesus, even in the darkest of moments, has the power to change hearts. For Longinus, that day on Golgotha was more than just another execution. It was the moment when he saw the truth of who Jesus was. His confession echoes through the ages, a reminder that even in the face of doubt, fear, and violence, the reality of Jesus' identity can break through and bring about transformation. Longinus may have started that day as a Roman soldier, but by the end, he had become something more, a man who had glimpsed the divine. After the piercing of Jesus' side and his confession, Longinus found himself at a turning point, one that wasn't just physical, but deeply spiritual. This Roman soldier, who had once carried out orders without question, was now confronted with something far greater than any authority he had ever known. The realization that he had taken part in the death of an innocent man, one whom he now believed to be the Son of God, must have weighed heavily on him. The rawness of this moment wasn't just about recognizing that Jesus was divine, but also about facing the brutal reality of his own actions. His confession wasn't the end of his journey, it was the beginning of a profound inner transformation. As the dust settled on Golgotha, the centurion began to process what had just happened. The events that had unfolded weren't merely political or legal, they had a spiritual dimension that pierced his heart. Imagine the inner turmoil Longinus must have experienced. A man who had spent his life serving Rome, living by the sword and by the empire's law, now found himself questioning everything he had known. His encounter with the crucified Christ was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. It's possible that in this moment, Longinus began to feel the first stirrings of faith, a faith that came not from a place of understanding, but from a place of awe and wonder. The piercing of Jesus' side was not just an act of violence, but a symbolic act that pierced Longinus' soul as well. Blood and water flowed from Jesus' body, and in many Christian traditions, this moment holds deep theological significance. The blood represents the sacrifice of Jesus, the Lamb of God, while the water symbolizes the new life and baptism that would come through his death. It's said that some of this water touched Longinus, and this moment marked the start of his spiritual awakening. Whether or not this is taken literally, the symbolism is powerful. The one who had struck the blow was now being washed by the very sacrifice he had helped enact. This awakening wasn't immediate or fully understood. Like many who encounter the truth of Christ for the first time, Longinus likely didn't grasp the full magnitude of what had just happened. But something in him had undeniably changed. The hardened heart of a Roman soldier had been softened by the display of divine grace and forgiveness he had witnessed in Jesus. Perhaps Longinus found himself reflecting on the way Jesus had spoken from the cross, offering forgiveness even to those who were crucifying him. Those words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," must have echoed in Longinus' mind. Could it be that Jesus' prayer had reached even him? As the hours passed, Longinus' thoughts may have shifted from the events of the crucifixion to deeper questions about the nature of life, death, and salvation. He had seen countless men die, but there was something different about Jesus, something that reached beyond the grave. Could it be that the man he had just crucified was offering him something more than just an example of noble suffering? Was it possible that this man's death had opened the door to a new kind of life? These are the questions that would have begun to stir within Longinus as he grappled with the reality of his spiritual awakening. What's particularly striking about Longinus' transformation is how unexpected it was. He hadn't come to Golgotha searching for truth or meaning. He had come to do a job. But the truth had found him anyway, in the most unlikely of places. This is often how spiritual awakenings begin, not in moments of peace or reflection, but in moments of crisis, pain, and confusion. For Longinus, the crucifixion of Jesus became a mirror, reflecting not just the divine nature of Christ, but also the brokenness within himself. It was as though his role as executioner had forced him to confront his own need for forgiveness and redemption. In many ways, Longinus represents all of us in our moments of doubt and blindness. He didn't fully understand who Jesus was when he pierced his side, just as we often don't fully understand the depth of God's love when we are at our lowest points. But grace has a way of breaking through, even in the darkest of places. Longinus' awakening was the beginning of a journey that would take him from the brutality of the Roman Empire to the transformative power of the kingdom of God. As Longinus stood before the cross, gazing up at the lifeless body of Jesus, he was no longer the man he had been just hours earlier. The soldier who had arrived with a heart conditioned for violence and duty had now experienced something that would forever alter the course of his life. This wasn't just a moment of realization, it was the start of a profound spiritual awakening that would continue to unfold in the days and years to come. What he had seen, what he had felt, couldn't be undone. The seeds of faith had been planted, and they would soon take root. The soldier's life would never be the same again. As Longinus' spiritual awakening began to take root, his life started to take a path no one could have predicted. The soldier who had pierced the side of Jesus was now becoming known not as an executioner, but as a witness to something far greater than the power of Rome. The historical record of Longinus is sparse, but over time, legends about him began to emerge. These stories, passed down through centuries, tell of a man whose encounter with Christ didn't end at the foot of the cross, but transformed him into a bold believer and eventually a martyr. One of the most well-known legends surrounding Longinus suggests that he left his military life behind after the crucifixion. According to tradition, Longinus became a Christian and devoted the rest of his life to spreading the message of Jesus. This was a dramatic shift for a man who had once served the Roman Empire, an empire that would later become infamous for persecuting Christians. In the Roman world, allegiance to the state and its emperor was paramount. For Longinus to turn his back on that, and instead proclaim Jesus as the Son of God, would have been seen as an act of rebellion. It's easy to imagine the weight of that decision. To go from being a soldier of Rome to a soldier of Christ was not just a spiritual transformation, but a complete reversal of his identity and purpose. The legends also speak of Longinus' eventual martyrdom. Like many early Christians, Longinus was said to have faced persecution for his faith. His conversion and newfound belief in Christ would not have been accepted lightly by those in power. According to one account, Longinus traveled to Cappadocia, where he preached the gospel and led others to Christ. However, this public declaration of faith made him a target of Roman authorities. It said that he was arrested and, refusing to renounce his faith, was sentenced to death. In this act of martyrdom, Longinus joined the countless early Christians who were willing to die rather than deny what they had come to believe. The story of Longinus doesn't end with his death, though. His legacy as a martyr only grew with time, and his story became an inspiration to Christians across the centuries. In many Christian traditions, Longinus is revered as a saint. His feast day is celebrated in both the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, and he is often depicted in Christian art holding the lance that pierced Jesus' side. The lance itself, known as the Holy Lance or the Spear of Destiny, became a powerful symbol in Christian history. Throughout the Middle Ages, it was said to possess mystical properties, and legends about its power spread throughout Europe. The spear that had once been a weapon of violence was now seen as a symbol of faith and redemption, much like the transformation of the soldier who had wielded it. The story of Longinus also highlights the paradox of the Christian faith, that out of death can come new life, and that even the darkest acts can be redeemed. Longinus, who had participated in one of the most brutal moments in history, became a symbol of the power of grace to transform and renew. His life reminds us that no one is beyond the reach of God's mercy, and that even those who seem furthest from faith can be drawn into the light of Christ. The man who had once pierced the side of Jesus became one of the first to bear witness to his divinity. The legend of Longinus has also found its way into various cultural and literary works throughout history. From medieval texts to modern novels, the story of the Roman centurion who pierced the side of Christ and later became a Christian has captured the imagination of people for centuries. It's a tale of transformation, redemption, and the unexpected ways in which God works in the world. Longinus' story resonates because it shows that even those who are complicit in the darkest of deeds can find a path to redemption through faith. In this way, Longinus stands as a symbol of hope for all of us. His life shows that it is never too late to turn toward the truth, and that no matter what we have done or how far we have strayed, God's grace is always available. The story of his martyrdom and his legacy as a saint remind us of the cost of following Christ, but also of the profound peace and purpose that come with living in the truth. Longinus' journey from soldier to saint is a powerful testament to the transformative power of faith. The story of Longinus extends far beyond his individual journey. It resonates with a profound impact on both the Christian faith and society at large. His experience is not just a historical account, but a narrative that speaks to the transformative power of belief and the possibility of redemption for all. From the moment he pierced Jesus' side to his eventual martyrdom, Longinus became a symbol of the potential for change, serving as a beacon of hope for those struggling with their own sins and doubts. His story has sparked countless discussions about faith, forgiveness, and the human capacity for change, inspiring both ancient and modern believers to reflect on their own lives and their own paths to faith. One of the most significant impacts of Longinus' story is how it illustrates the theme of divine grace. Longinus was a man who participated in an act of brutality, yet he became a pivotal figure in the story of salvation. This narrative demonstrates that grace can reach even those we might consider beyond redemption. For many believers, Longinus serves as a reminder that no matter how far one has fallen or what mistakes have been made, God's grace can transform lives. This powerful message encourages individuals to embrace their faith, reassuring them that they are never too far gone to experience a life-changing encounter with Christ. It invites reflection on personal journeys, urging people to consider their own potential for redemption. Longinus' story has also permeated various aspects of culture, from literature and art to film and music. His transformation from soldier to believer has inspired countless authors, artists, and musicians to explore themes of faith and redemption in their own works. In literature, we find stories of characters who mirror Longinus' struggles and triumphs, showcasing how his journey resonates with the human experience. In art, depictions of Longinus often highlight the moment of piercing Jesus' side, capturing the intense emotions of that moment while simultaneously inviting viewers to ponder the profound implications of that act. This blend of brutality and grace offers a fertile ground for creative exploration, inviting new generations to reflect on faith and the possibility of transformation. Moreover, the legend of Longinus has influenced the way martyrs are viewed in the Christian tradition. As a soldier who turned from violence to faith, Longinus embodies the idea that martyrdom is not only about death for one's beliefs but also about a life fully dedicated to sharing the truth of the gospel. His story emphasizes that the legacy of a martyr is not solely defined by their end, but by how they lived their life leading up to that moment. This perspective has inspired many to examine the lives of those who have stood firm in their faith despite facing persecution, encouraging believers to take a stand for their beliefs in their own lives. In addition, Longinus' journey speaks to the larger narrative of the Christian faith, which is rooted in the idea of sacrifice and resurrection. His initial act of piercing Christ led to a revelation of Jesus' true identity, an awakening that has echoed through the ages. This connection reinforces the central Christian theme that through death, life can emerge. The interplay between sacrifice and transformation is foundational to Christianity, and Longinus' story acts as a poignant reminder of how these themes manifest in real lives. It urges believers to reflect on their own sacrifices in the pursuit of faith and the ways in which those sacrifices can lead to greater understanding and connection with God. As Longinus' story continues to be shared and celebrated, it plays a critical role in fostering conversations about faith, doubt, and the human experience. For contemporary audiences, Longinus represents the struggles of those navigating their own spiritual journeys. His life encourages individuals to embrace their questions, recognizing that doubt can coexist with faith. This dialogue is vital in a world where many feel disconnected from spirituality or unsure of their beliefs. Longinus' legacy serves as a bridge, inviting those who may feel lost or uncertain to explore the depths of their faith and find a place within the Christian narrative. In essence, the lasting impact of Longinus' story lies in its ability to connect the past with the present, demonstrating that the struggles and triumphs of one individual can ripple through time and space, affecting countless lives. His transformation from a Roman soldier to a devout believer illustrates the potential for change that exists within all of us. Longina's story invites us to consider our own lives, encouraging us to seek redemption, embrace grace, and ultimately, to live out our faith with courage and conviction.